All right, fabulous. Well, go ahead and get started. Steph, yeah, obviously, me, Phil. I think I've seen you in a few webinars, but just in case y'all don't know me, I'm David Smith. I'm one of the community managers here at Virtual Sports Psych, and I also and I'll probably go into this a little bit later, but I tend to talk a lot about the Pride Cheerleading Association a lot because they're kind of like in sports psychology, especially, but in a lot of different elements of sport. You kind of have like your gateway into sport, right? In terms of like the work that I've been doing, like when doing my education in sports psychology, education and coaching, and all these things like that. Obviously, one of the biggest things you want to get is the experience and finding that club or that organization that you can work with that gets you that foot in the door and helps you take that first step to get the kind of experience that you need and you want in terms of getting you to the next level. So for me, that was the Pride Cheerleading Association. They were kind of the first organization to really, as a sports organization, as a sports club, to really kind of reach out and say, hey, we know what you're trying to do. Here's how we can help you out. So a lot of my initial experience working with them is what helped shape me as a sports psychologist, as well as I'll get into a little bit more information about who they are and why I continue to support them on that front as well. But so my presentation, Cheer for Life, Cheer with Pride, a social identity approach to charitable cheerleading and community development. All right, so today we are going to be discussing a little bit about myself, a little bit more expanding on that. Like I said, I'm going to introduce who the Pride Cheerleading Association is, as far as the organization itself, the work that they do, as well as then when we get into the aspects of community identity, how does that work reflect and shape the identity of the organization and the individuals as part of it, as well as the communities in which they serve. So then from there, we'll go between the individual to the community and back. We'll talk about the theory, of course, with social identity theory and self categorization theory that have been pioneered by Tajfel and Turner. We'll talk about some key takeaways in regard to social identity in sports. And then the ultimate goal is to help you how, well, I guess I forgot to update this little section here because the original presentation of this was for the Pride Cheerleading Association, actually. So obviously you are not members of the Pride Cheerleading Association, so you're not participating in their activities. But one thing, as far as the goal, is to think about how the participation in your clubs and communities shape and reflect in your identity as well. So if it's not the Pride Cheerleading Association for you, it's the rugby club, the cricket club, soccer club, any other organization like that. It's basically just insert organization here, right? So, I mean, I know y'all are pretty familiar with who I am, but I am a PhD candidate at the German Sports University in Cologne with a master's degree in sport and exercise psychology and a bachelor's degree in sport and exercise science. I was recently accredited by the Arbeitsgemeinschaft der Sportpsychologie as a sports psychology expert, which is the German Association for Sports Psychologists. I'm also a National Strength and Conditioning Association certified strength and conditioning specialist. So, Phil, when we talked about the coaching I do, that's the work that I do. Like I mentioned, I work with Virtual Sports Psych as community manager. My role with PCA is both sports psychology consultant and videographer. So there's a picture of me in action doing videography for PCA 2 years ago in Las Vegas. I know there's a playground in the background. We were at a sport park at a softball field, but yeah. So I'll explain a little bit more about how all that came together. I also work for an organization, Compete Sports Diversity. In terms of the actual applied work outside of PCA, I work with SCFC Duren, which is a football club here in Germany, as a strength and conditioning coach and sports psychology consultant, as well as for a sports club SC Giannis as a strength and conditioning coach and swimming coach for them. All right, on to the good stuff. Who is the Pride Cheerleading Association? Their mission is that they use cheerleading as a platform to raise money for charity. So directly, if you go to their website, the mission advances charitable cheerleading globally by creating community, developing resources, and spreading cheer in pursuit of equity for every individual in LGBTQ spaces and beyond. So basically, it's a more of a comprehensive organization that has a series of teams underneath it. And it originally started as one team, Cheer San Francisco, in the 1980s, that just started off as adults doing cheerleading, eventually turned into a organization that raised money for charity, and then it just grew and expanded from there. So what originally started as one team in San Francisco then became another team in New York, and another team in Los Angeles, and a team in Seattle, and a team in Portland, and a team in Colorado, a team in Salt Lake City, and a team all over these places. And now all over the US especially, and now it's actually expanding worldwide as well. There's these inclusive cheerleading teams that are raising money for charity all over the place. So the Pride Cheerleading Association as an organization developed out of that as a way to kind of create an association for all these teams to be a part of. And we'll get into the reason why for that in a little bit. The ultimate goal of the organization, so both the association and the preceding member teams, is to raise spirits, awareness, and funds for causes in the LGBT community and beyond. So when we want to talk about identity, the identity of PCA is that it's a support network to share resources, experience, innovations among established and developing LGBTQ community-based cheer teams. So right now, PCA has 14 member teams that are official members of PCA. And they have a series of requirements that member teams have to fulfill in order to be part of PCA. PCA as a whole is a 501c3 nonprofit organization, which is a U.S. designation of a nonprofit charity, basically. They've got 14 member teams, but when you actually really dive deep, there are, I want to say, probably 50 teams all over the U.S. of various capacities that are not members of PCA that also follow the same basic mission of charitable cheerleading. So in terms of membership into PCA, which we'll get into a little bit when we talk about in-group dynamics, involves a series of rules that each of these teams have to apply. But having said that, PCA isn't the only organization that represents charitable cheerleading in this regard. Another aspect of the PCA identity, like I said, is an association under which cheer teams may assemble during events like the Quadrangle Gay Games, the Sin City Classic, which is from what this picture is from, which is an annual LGBT multi-sport event. But you also have other events and performances in which multiple teams come together. A very common one is different Pride festivals. So the 50th anniversary of the Stonewall riots in New York City in 2019, PCA had at least 4 or 5 different teams represented there. Same with events, especially in California. They've got 3 official member teams in California: Sacramento, Cheer San Francisco, and Cheer LA. They'll actually come together for the different Pride festivals in those cities and have all 3 of those teams represented, maybe some of the other member teams as well. Same with Washington. They've got Cheer Seattle and Cheer Tacoma in Washington, so those teams will oftentimes get together. And so it's a different way of these association. It's an association for these different teams that can come together and be connected to each other. And then it's also a community partner for the Safe Space Alliance, which is an LGBT-led nonprofit organization that aims to help identify, navigate, and create safe spaces for the LGBTQ community worldwide. So what we talk a lot about here in terms of the community, like the LGBT community, the PCA community, and things like that. What communities does PCA and its member teams identify with and serve? And we talked a little bit about here, but I've got this lovely little chart. And when it comes to identity, this is where identity shapes how the organization is involved with the different communities that it associates with, right? We're talking about the social communities and the physical communities. So, PCA is an organization. They're connected to the LGBT community, right? Because their work is specifically oriented towards the LGBT community. This includes membership in organizations like the Safe Space Alliance, also the Gay Games. With that said, They're also membership in the LGBT sports community, which would be a subset of the LGBT community, right? It's for LGBT people who are involved in sports, which again is what the gay games are. So PCA as a cheerleading organization, cheerleading is a sport. They identify with the sports community and the LGBT sports community, right? You've got the cheerleading community. A lot of the members of the Pride Cheerleading Association have been doing cheerleading since they were kids. In fact, I was having a discussion with this with the president of the Cheerleading Association. In the movie Bring It On, I don't know if you all remember that movie, the 2000s with Kristen Dunst and Liza Dushku, famous movie about cheerleading. Pretty much half of the members of PCA were all background actors in that movie because when they shot the movie, they needed cheerleaders, obviously, and a lot of these, the time that they were all in high school and college and stuff like that, they're members of the cheerleading community, so that's what they did. They went to the cheerleading community, the filmmakers did, and said, "Hey, can you just be in the background and do some stuff? Do what you normally do for us. We'll just, put our actors in front, play out the scene, things like that." So a lot of members, like I said, of the overarching cheerleading community. PCA raises money for different membership organizations, or not membership organizations, but nonprofit organizations. So a lot of charities. As a result, they're identified with the communities of their beneficiaries. For example, whenever they go to the Sin City Classic, which is the multi-sport event in Las Vegas, PCA itself does not have a cheerleading team based in Las Vegas. The reason why they're active in the community in Las Vegas is because of their participation in the Sin City Classic. So you've got your community connection through the LGBT sports community and that specific event, the Sin City Classic. As a result, being in Las Vegas, whenever they go there, they choose a charity that's based in Las Vegas to raise money for. The last few years, it's been this organization called the Golden Rainbow. What the Golden Rainbow does is to raise money for developing housing and resources to live for people affected by HIV and AIDS. So when you're dealing with HIV and AIDS, treatments and measures for dealing with the disease costs a lot of money. And as a result of that cost, unfortunately, people aren't always able to afford rent or mortgages or basic living expenses, things like that. So the Golden Rainbow raises money to support people living with HIV and AIDS. As a result, PCA, raising money for the Golden Rainbow, is now connected with that organization and as a result, that community. So they are connected with the HIV positive community and the different types of people that Golden Rainbow represents through their connections with Golden Rainbow as a result, raising money charity for them. That makes sense. Like I said, you've got the events. So obviously participation in Sin City Classic, participation in gay games, participation in Pride events, things like that. That also creates that identified membership. Then you have the local communities, the actual physical local communities in which they exist. So Cheer Salt Lake, obviously they're connected with the Salt Lake City community. Cheer Tacoma, connected with the Tacoma community. Cheer Colorado, they're connected with the Colorado community. So the actual physical local area in which they exist is obviously a community that they identify with. And then you have the local communities based on the membership. So again, the Federation of the Gay Games community, the Safe Space Alliance community, everybody like that. All these different ways that you can connect and identify with these various communities simply through the membership of one organization. But we talk a lot about the organization itself, but what about the individuals within the organization? The organizations and communities are influential to support the common goals and collective action that is relative to the people in which they serve. So like I said, the Pride Cheerleading Association is an organization made up full of people who are interested in cheerleading, who are members of the cheerleading community. As a result, it's a cheerleading organization, which is reflective of the individuals that are part of it. It primarily consists of people of the LGBT community, so it's an LGBT cheerleading organization. The individuals are shaped by the communities in which they identify with, and in turn, the communities are shaped by the individuals in which they are made up from. It's a cyclical relationship, right? So membership in PCA makes you a cheerleader. Membership there also makes you part of the LGBT community, even if you're not necessarily identified as LGBT. This person right here, love her to death. Her name is Sarah. She is straight and she is cisgender. She is not LGBT at all whatsoever. But she's a member of PCA. She's a member of Cheer San Francisco. She's right here raising money, just like every other member of the team. As a result, she is part of this community. She's what we call an ally. She's there to support the organization. She's there to support the community. She's active, and she's doing her part to help advance the goals and the overall mission of what PCA represents in that regard. So even if she's not LGBT herself, she's still part of this community because of her membership and her participation through the organization, right? The PCA member teams are from a community that is driven by a common goal of charitable cheerleading. So the reason why PCA exists is because they want to raise money for charity and they want to do it through cheerleading, right? That's the goal that binds all these member teams together under one association. This is what people join PCA to be a part of. They want to raise money for charity. They want to do cheerleading. They want to support the community. Whatever there are reasons are the reasons why they're a member of PCA. On the flip side, like I said, Sarah here is not an LGBT person. I don't know why she's a member of PCA. Maybe she wants to raise money for charity. Maybe she wants to do cheerleading. Who knows? But that membership into that organization has helped her to learn more about the LGBT community and has helped to shape a lot of her perspective as an individual as a result. So it's a two-way relationship. The way that the community identifies is based on the individuals that make it up, but at the same time, the individuals who are part of it are shaped by the community in which they represent, if that makes sense. So we'll get into the actual theory of it. The social identity theory was established in 1970. It's kind of been shaped a little bit here and there since then, but for the most part, it's relatively remained intact. Its basic underlying foundation is to understand the psychology of intergroup relationships. That is the who's in the in group, who's in the out group. So like here, you got, the in group, you got the out group. Individuals will categorize themselves regarding the group membership. Are you a member of the in group? Are you a member of the out group? And then define themselves in terms of that social categorization. So in this case, all these people in this picture are members of PCA. But as you could tell, there's two different groups here. This is Cheer San Francisco. This is Cheer Los Angeles. While they're all members of the PCA in group, obviously you've got the Cheer Los Angeles in group and the Cheer San Francisco in group. They're not necessarily within the same group, right? They'll define themselves based on these different types of categories. Cheer LA is a category. Cheer San Francisco is a category. That's what defines their membership within the group, right? Individuals will seek to achieve or maintain their own self-esteem by positively identifying their in-group self versus the out-group comparison, which leads to a sense of we and us versus I and me. So when they think of being a member of PCA, when they think of, oh, if somebody asks, what are you doing here? They say, we are raising money for charity. We are here to raise spirits. We, as a group, are here to do this. It's not, I am here to raise money for charity. It's not, I am here to do cheerleading. It's we, as in we as PCA, we as Cheer San Francisco, we as whoever that in group is. In this case, this was at the Gay Games cheerleading competition where all the different member teams participated and competed against each other. In this case, it would be we, Cheer Los Angeles, won this competition versus we, Cheer San Francisco, lost, right? It's not I lost, it's we lost. To develop strength of in-group identity relies on three elements. The stability of the group, because if you're not really confident or sure the group is actually going to last or stick around, you're less likely to be wanting to become a member of the in group, because unstable in groups don't really last and people are less likely to join. The perceived legitimacy of an in group's position in relation to other groups. So, for example, within the organization itself, PCA, if there's a break off group that says we were cheer San Francisco, but we're going to become cheer Oakland or something like that, the more legitimate that separate group feels in regard to the recognition of them with the other groups. Do those other groups actually recognize this splinter group as their own legitimate group? Yes, then they're more likely to foster membership. But if this group breaks off, maybe does not necessarily reflect the mission or the goals or the values of the Pride Cheerleading Association as a whole, then those other groups, those other teams are not going to see it as legitimate. They're not going to support it. As a result, in terms of membership, they're going to have a hard time fostering membership from other people interested in charitable cheerleading from joining that specific group, because they're not perceived as legitimate by these groups that foster those kind of goals and values. The strength of in-group identity is also reflected in the permeability of the group boundaries. So like I said, PCA as a whole has certain requirements for organization or for member teams to fulfill if they want to become a member of PCA. So not everybody can show up. Not anybody can come knocking on the door and say, I want to become a member of PCA. You have to fulfill those requirements first. It's a whole process. For the individuals who want to become a cheerleader, again, they have certain requirements. The teams will hold tryouts. And during the tryouts, they do choreography, they do cheerleading skills, stunting skills, things like that. They do all sorts of things. Not everybody who tries out gets in. So this is kind of their way as well of being able to ensure, okay, are you actually representative of what our teams represent? Are you what the kind of person that we want on our team? Are you able to do cheerleading safely? Do you have the skills? Do you have the competencies for it? Do we need to teach you? Are you open to teaching? Things like that. These are all ways that they're evaluating people to determine, are you going to be an acceptable member of our group? As a result, while it may be permeable, it's not completely open. And the permeability is what helps to strengthen that group identity. Obviously, the harder it is to get into the group, the more specific and strong this group identity is going to be. The weaker the permeability, anybody can just join in here and there. That specific identity is going to be as strong because there'll be more people, but also the goals and values and mission of that group as a whole will be less defined. Further moving on from that, then you have the self-categorization theory. And this is where it dives deeper into the inner workings of the self. So not so much about the group as much as the individual. But then how does that individual ultimately affect the group? Which again, you got 3 insights. Social identity permits group behavior to occur. So you got self-stereotyping that develops based on who defines themselves in terms of that particular social identity. So, like we said, the different identities of PCA, LGBT community, sports, physical community, things like that, all different aspects based on a particular social identity. And how do people define themselves in that regard, which ultimately leads to self-stereotyping, right? Obviously, you can say, well, members of PCA fit this kind of stereotype. Members of Cheer San Francisco fit this kind of stereotype. Or even broader, the reason why stereotypes exist at all, like, all lesbians are athletes, or all women athletes are lesbians, or all gay men are figure skaters, or something like that. Like, sometimes these stereotypes are valid, sometimes they're not. But ultimately, the reason why they kind of start to exist is because of the social identity and how it leads to the way that people and groups define themselves. The sense of self reflects operation of a categorization process based on the membership. So your social identity is activated based on the categorization's fit and the person's readiness to use it. So people within Pride Cheerleading Association are going to tell people that they're members of the Pride Cheerleading Association. They wear the clothes, they got the look. They're out there with the buckets, soliciting donations. And when people ask them, "Who are you and why are you here?" We are the Pride Cheerleading Association, and we are raising money for our charity. And they'll tell the charity is. They'll tell all about the charity, all these things that they can do in terms of fundraising. So the membership of the group allows them to operate, to reflect the operation of that categorization, right? So being able to talk about it, being able to share it, being able to enthusiastically express their membership to that group and their identity that revolves around it. And then, of course, you got shared identity as the basis for mutual social influence. So it creates a conduit between individual perceptions of action behaviors and organized collective behaviors, right? So raising money for charity, individuals going out there saying, you know what, I want to do something good for my community. I want to be supportive. I want to find a way to give back. Going to go out there, raise some money. Obviously, they're not the only ones that do it. The group comes together and says, well, how can we do this more effectively? How can we do this as a group? Who are we raising money for? And where are we going to go to do it, right? Select a charity, select an event. How are we going to actually raise the money? They got buckets here. On the buckets, you drop cash in. They'll even put a QR code on the side to make it easy for people to do it electronically. And they say, well, great. How do we get people's attention? Well, we're a bunch of cheerleaders, so let's do some cheerleading. I haven't shared the videos yet, but at the last Sin City Classic in Las Vegas, as part of the cheerleading competition, they will go out onto the Las Vegas Strip, like onto the Strip, and actually be fundraising right there as, drunken people are walking by full of money from gambling, right? It's a really, really way to do it. And I was out there with my camera filming it. And it was so great to see because, all the different teams were out there. They were all wearing their own team gear and stuff like that. But they were all out there for the same reason, raising money for the same charity. And, they were doing cheerleading stunts and chants and cheers and having all sorts of fun ways of interacting with the crowd as they were walking by to get people to hear and learn about who they are and ultimately get the dollars in the bucket, right? To get the donation. And I observed something really interesting is that there were certain groups that actually were able to get more donations than other groups. And it had nothing to do with the actual physical location or the time of day, because all these teams were out there at the same time, but they were all in their own different locations. But all the locations that we visited had roughly about the same amount of people walking by. But I noticed that based on some of the ways that the group as a whole was interacting with the crowd and the way that they were doing things to try and get people's attention and get them, to look and see them and ultimately donate money, played a major role in certain groups earning way more money than other groups did. And it actually kind of caused a controversy a little bit because at the cheerleading competition, the amount of money that these teams raise actually has a major influence on their score. It's like 50% of their score. So even if you're horrible on the technical program, even if you do the actual routine and you're horrible and it doesn't go well, you could still win if you raise more money than everybody else. And one of the teams actually raised like the highest grossing team solely from spending 60 minutes on the strip, only raising money, raised over $1,000. The next team that placed second only raised like $200. So it caused this whole drama because they said, well, wait a minute. You must have cheated or something, because if you're the only team here that raised $1,000, you're the only team that raised more than $200 here, but not just by a little bit, by 500%. Something's off. Something's not right. And I actually ended up being the kind of mediator in that because I had my camera out there and I specifically showed them the footage and I analyzed it and I analyzed them. I said, this is why this team raised so much more money for charity. This is why they raised $1,000. Here's exactly what they were doing. I showed them the videos. I said, here's the way they're interacting with the crowd. Here's the way that they're showing enthusiasm and being more active and involved and putting themselves out there versus here is second place, which I also filmed, that was a little bit more shy and a little more reserved and not so active and things like that. And there was a clear distinction in the way that these teams were behaving, in the way that they would try and engage the crowd, that played a major role in how much money they raised. And I literally got shots of random passerbys just taking a 20, dipping into the bucket, taking a 20, dipping in the bucket, things like that. I ended up doing a few blog articles on that myself because it was straight up like, those teams were out there expressing and sharing as a collective in the way that they were behaving and pushing to raise money, which ultimately was a reflection of their shared social identity. And again, coming back to, was the basis of mutual social influence. The key point here is people's willingness to engage constructively with others and respond positively to such engagement is structured by this self-categorization process. And I saw it firsthand with this team raising $1,000 by getting out there and proudly representing who they were raising money for, and ultimately why they were there. All right, so we got 4 key takeaways with that. Social identity is the basis for sports group behavior. So like I said, group membership helps to shape and internalize a person's sense of self. Self-definition varies as a function of the social setting, right? Like I said, cheerleading on the strip with your group is a lot different than doing the cheer competition with the group. But it functions, it varies because of the specific social setting. Are we doing this as a competition? Are we doing this for, the Pride Festival? Who knows? But ultimately, in the end, it's for the same reason. Some settings, a person's sense of self is defined in terms of that personal identity. So maybe say at the event like the Sin City Classic, person identifies as a member of PCA, as a cheerleader. I actually had, speaking of sports psychology with PCA, my main identity with them generally is videographer, but I also work with them as a sports psychology professional. And we talked about this, I think, a couple times, was at the Gay Games of Guadalajara. I had to switch those hats very distinctly because there was an accident that occurred and I had to put on my sports psychology hat. And within that setting, I had to change my overt identity as a relationship with PCA from videographer to sports psychologist because the setting and the circumstances of that setting and what occurred required me to shift my identity in that regard to better suit the needs of the organization within that moment. I had to step up and deal with bigger priorities as a sports psychologist than what I had to do as a videographer. Social identity is the basis for sports group formation and development. Like I said, PCA started as a bunch of, gay men wanting to do cheerleading, decided, what, they also wanted to raise money for charity and participated in the gay games. It helps to build and affirm the meaningfulness in social identity. A group member's sense of self helps to shape the group identity. Like I said, the individuals that make it up ultimately shape the group as a whole. Group cohesion has been shown to enhance performance and group success. So I can't say this scientifically, but that group that raised money over $1,000 on the strip, I feel like that they had a stronger cohesion than the group that only raised 200. Group that raised 200 wasn't so active. They were a little bit more shy. They weren't so interacty as much with each other as the other group was. If I had to bet money on it, I would say that the $1,000 group definitely had a higher levels of cohesion. Depersonalization is the core process that binds group members together in terms of social identity that is shared with others. Again, this is the us and we versus the I and me, right? So we are here to raise money. We are here to support the the organization, right? Not I. Social identity is a key motivator for continued group support, right? Cheer San Francisco has been around since the 80s, in over 40 years. PCA started in, I think, 2009. It was officially incorporated in 2014, so a little over 10 years now. So part of this identity has been a major role in the support of the group, which has allowed it to continue to exist and thrive and grow in the way that it has. And people with higher levels of group identification buy more into the group, right? They buy more into the mission, into the goals, and the purpose of what the group represents. Social identity is the basis for sport group support and stress appraisal. So in terms of a primary stress appraisal, stressors in the environment are in some way threatening to the self and well-being, right? The secondary is to the extent in which that social support is available to help. Going out onto the strip with a bucket and asking people for money is a stressor. That's a scary thing to do. You gotta have a lot of confidence. You gotta have a lot of willingness to be extroverted and to engage with strangers, because everybody's asking for money. So why should they give a shit about you? It's a scary thing. So being able to do that as a member of a group with that social support around you definitely helps make it a lot easier to do. It's based upon one's own sense of self in relation to their environment and the group, right? So having other members of the group that you can, depend upon for support, and of course the environment in which you all are participating in. If it's a competition versus, raising money on the strip, that environment is unique and relative to that moment, and of course the group that you're with. Finally, social identity is the basis for sport group behavior. You might find people who have leadership qualities that you never even thought had leadership qualities at all. But a leader embodies the meaningfulness of a group from its members, and it engenders followership from the group, right? So we see leadership and leadership qualities happen all the time with athletes on our sports teams, even when we don't expect it, or even when we think of people as leaders, maybe it turns out that they're not. Leaders and followers come to see each other as part of the common in-group, again, cultivating the sense of we is greater than the me. Successful leaders strive to mobilize team members through consistent articulation of team values built around a positive and distinctive and enduring sense of team identity. So by constantly, for example, PCA is constantly articulating who they are and what their values are. We raise money for LGBT charities. They literally say that in their one sentence elevator speech. We are a community of charitable cheerleaders. They're constantly reminding, we are here to raise money. Our priority is raising money for charity. We love cheerleading. We raise money for charity. That's all they will say. Before the end of the day, anytime you meet anybody at PCA, they will tell you exactly who they are, what they're there for, and you'll know it. So reminding their group and reminding everybody who we are, what we represent, what are our values, what are you here for, really helps to articulate that positive sense of team identity. Again, saying it's not just about the me, it's about the we. I'm a member of PCA. I represent these values. I represent this identity. I represent this mission, all these things like that. I'm a part of this group. So when I talk about them, I'm talking not just about me, but we. The confidence expressed by the leaders into the team is a powerful determinant of success. If the leader is confident in what the team is doing or the organization is doing, they're going to be successful. We're going to go out there. We're going to go raise money. I know we can do it. I know it's scary. I know people are going to walk by and ignore us. But we've got the spirit. We've got the motivation. We've got all these things. We're going to go out there and do it. That confidence is very important when imparted upon the members of the group to go out there and see that mission through. But finally, social identity within sport helps to offer insight and understanding for sport-related behavior that expands upon the concept of sport to enhance the human capacity for collective endeavors and create positive change within ourselves, each other, and the community. I hope y'all got that because that's kind of wordy. But this is ultimately really kind of gets down to it. The reason why I really love sport because of all the really cool things that you can do just through something as cheerleading, just through something as swimming, just through something as any sport that you do really has a big impact on how we can develop ourselves as humans and build on the collective endeavors to create positive change within ourselves, within each other, within our community, and within our society. Golden Rainbow, this organization, they raise money for, to help people living with HIV to cover living expenses. At the Sin City Classic alone this last year, their goal was to raise over 2 days, their goal was to raise $3,000. They raised $6,000. They raised twice as much money for their goal. 3 months earlier, we went to Guadalajara for the Gay Games. They supported an organization called Maison that funds treatments for when women who are HIV positive get pregnant. The baby is usually born with the disease as well, but they've developed a treatment for when the woman gets pregnant. They developed a treatment that makes it so that the baby is not born with the disease. But each treatment costs $4,000 to administer. So it's not easy to do. This organization is specifically designed to raise money to support people to get that treatment and to make it more affordable and accessible. PCA alone, over the course of that week that they were there, raised over $18,000 that went directly to this organization. So all of this simply through doing cheerleading, which, does more than just do sport. It's about the greater impact that they're having, again, on their community. Maison in Guadalajara, their community identified through their participation in the Gay Games and the organization values in which they represent. Also the LGBT community. Golden Rainbow, same thing. The physical community in Las Vegas, participation in LGBT sports events in the community, all these different ways that they identify help them to contribute a significant chunk of change to these organizations that are ultimately doing a lot more to help their communities and society as a whole. So the idea of social identity and the behaviors that it engenders are applies not just to the individuals that make up the group, but also for the groups, teams, and organizations themselves within their communities. So with that, 15. So any questions, thoughts, reflections, comments? Love to hear what you think.
Thank you, Dirk. Great work that you're doing there together with the PCA. My question right now is if there's something that you can transfer from the things that you did and that you learned from working with the PCA to other teams specifically. So because not all sports teams are working towards collecting money, raising funds for bigger purposes, but they are there for winning matches, winning medals, competing at tournaments. What are the most important things that you took away from that work with the PCA for working with teams that have other goals?
One of my favorite things about sport and working with different teams is the kinds of really cool opportunities that it can create for the athletes and the members who are within that team and that organization. So yeah, PCA, is a charitable driven organization. Like you said, not everybody is, a lot of them are more competitive focused, right? But we look at the different ways that we compete and express ourselves through sport, especially in competition. You've got events like the Olympics, and the World Championships, and all sorts of different types of events like the Pan American Games and the Pan Pacific Games, and you've got local level sports events, and then you got different levels of the sport, right? You got youth sports, college sports, high school sports, recreational sports, elite sports, all these different things like that. One of my favorite things is because, say you know, we talked about being a member of the football club. A lot of these kids growing up learning how to play football, they're competing, right? But they have people that they look up to within the football community. You got your Lionel Messi's and your Cristiano Ronaldo's and all these really cool people. You've got the professional sports teams as a whole. For example, one of my favorite things is being able to take a group of kids, doing pee wee football and taking them to a professional football game. And not just necessarily to watch it, but say during halftime or during one of the breaks, they get to go out onto the field and play a little mini match. They get their experience of being able to be in the field of a stadium full of people and get to play some football, which as a kid is one of the coolest things ever. And then to be a part of that kind of community gives an insight of, say, hey, here's how you can grow as a footballer. Here's the kinds of things that you can look forward to if you stick with football. Here's where it could take you.
Yeah, right. Sorry for interrupting, but then you are looking at the personal level and not on the social level.
Right. But then, you can also get into being able to be an athlete within that sport. How does that sport serve as a platform for not only you as an individual to grow and develop, but also your community and the organization that you are part of, right? So, you've got a team in a town or whatever. People around that town are going to be more supporting that specific team because that team is representative of members within that community, right? It's the kids of that community and the students that go to the school and things like that. So you'll have people showing up to the games and the matches to support their team, even if they don't know any of those kids on the field. They're there because, oh, this is, for example, FC Köln, right? People support FC Köln because they are the Cologne football team. They don't know they don't know the individuals personally or the athletes involved, or they don't even maybe necessarily identify with soccer, but it's a part of their community that they do identify with, that they want to go out there and support. And especially if they are a part of soccer, that maybe as an individual gives them something to say, hey, in my own future endeavors, maybe this is something I can go towards or be a part of or develop within, not just as an individual, but as part of my community, either the Cologne community, the soccer community, or some other aspect of a community in which that organization is specifically identified with. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. I'm just wondering how to work with people inside a team based on the social identity theory, and based on your experiences. Getting the people to the community and the greater good, etc., and the bigger community is one thing, but really focusing on the work that we do as a sports psychologist is maybe different.
Yeah. Well, and to get them involved, right? And get them involved in these other aspects of the community. Like I said, when I was talking about one of my favorite things was when I go back to Denver, I go to the hockey games at the University of Denver, and it's Division I NCAA hockey. And during the period, during the breaks between the periods, they'll have little pee-wee hockey teams come out onto the ice and play hockey in the middle of a period, and these kids are like 6, 7 years old. I mean, they're barely able to skate, let alone, put the puck in the goal. And it's so great for these kids. And I'm always so inspired by that because they're, doing something that's fun and different for these kids to get them exposed to the greater aspects of the hockey community rather than just showing up to their own ice rink, learning the hockey and playing and then going home. They're doing something that's for the greater part of the community. So when we work with these teams and we work with these athletes, it's saying, hey, what are some opportunities that we can use our membership to this, our in-group membership to this community as a way to find how we can be reflect in the bigger picture of it all, and reflect with the other members of our community that we represent, right? When you have some of these professional athletes that go out and sign autographs, or do charity work for their local community, they're saying, hey, I'm trying to connect with everybody outside of just playing football, because it's about more than just playing football. But at the same time, football, here's all we can accomplish just through playing football. So as sports psychologists, I guess the best way to kind of sum that up is just, here's how we can find opportunities to use the platform that we have to connect with all the different things that we can grow from, starting from there. No, I guess, yeah. Any other thoughts?
If I can,
I
if
re-
I can
oh,
just
go.
say that there was something there. You said successful leaders strive to mobilize through consistent articulation of values. The the problem that I think that is, who sets those values?
Right.
Because I know we've had a lot of problem within the English rugby organization, the RFU, where they set the values of that the RFU have, but they didn't actually communicate with anybody below them. A think tank came out with these 5 words.
Yeah.
So actually, therefore, I totally agree that a successful leader has to be out there and consistently remind the group of why we're doing it, what we're doing it for, the reason that we're all getting out and doing whatever we're doing. But it's who sets those values, because if you've got a team that doesn't believe in the values that you are consistently articulating to them, then it's a complete waste of time.
Right.
And it's trying to marry up who makes the values, who agrees the values, how you get them to the values. And I guess that's another conversation, really. But that was the thing that struck me.
Well, and it's a good point, because, like I mentioned, the values of the organization are representative of the individuals that are members of that organization, right? And then vice versa. The values of the individual are are shaped by the values of the organization. But if there's not a lot of crossover there, if they're kind of keeping them distinct and separate, then members of the individuals are less likely to identify the organization as a whole, because the organization as a whole maybe are not articulating their values or reminding them of the values. So then as a result, then people are joining who maybe don't share those same values.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the main thing there is, in junior sport, is the difference between the X's and O's and the process, right? So you have a group of, let's say, let's say my under 15s rugby side are just absolutely about X's and O's. The under 14s are all about the process, and the scoreboard will take care of itself, to paraphrase Bill Walsh. So
right.
Again, those are completely different values that those guys have. Those coaches are doing different jobs, all under the same umbrella, and it's just trying to marry all those up.
Right, exactly. And I mean, then that's where, you can kind of see maybe where the identity shapes is not as strong, because maybe then those athletes will identify more with their, like, if it's a U14 group, they'll identify more with that aspect of the team of the U14 group versus the organization as a whole, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So when they think of, oh, my team, they're thinking of,
they're not thinking about the umbrella organization. They're thinking about their specific unit within that. And is that okay? So does the PCA, do you have, I don't know, on there were lots of different pictures of different pyramids or troops or whatever you want to call them. So, would it be as defined as that you have one group of 5 or 6 or whatever, how many, where they would maybe have different values to that group, to that group, to that group, or do they need to have the same values as the umbrella organization?
So for the case of PCA, the PCA requires their member teams to reflect certain standards of membership into the in group of PCA.
Okay.
So like PCA is the in group that says, okay, to be a member of our in group PCA, these teams have to meet these values, these like specific things, right? So like I said, there's charitable cheerleading teams all over the country that are not members of PCA. And it's exactly that. It's, maybe the values of that specific team are different than what PCA values. And as a result, then while they may have similar values, they're not necessarily the same to the point where that team is a member of PCA as a whole. If that makes sense.
Yeah, so I've just written down each group maybe has to reflect a certain number of the umbrella group's values to be part of the in-group.
Right, exactly. And that's where, that's what creates that permeability, right? So with PCA to be a member of the group, like I said, not every team can just join PCA. They can only join if they fulfill these certain requirements based on the shared sense of values there. But
that makes sense.
But even then though, there's still some adaptability and flexibility within the teams themselves. So, they say like, for example, Cheers Salt Lake says we want to raise money for this specific charity, which maybe is more reflective of the Salt Lake community more than the LGBT community, right? Or something like that. So they can still have that kind of flexibility there where they don't necessarily have to be a carbon copy of what PCA represents. They could still have an individual sense of identity that's shaped by other factors as well. But as far as that in-group membership goes, there has to be some shared sense of value there within both organizations for that in-group.
Sure.
Gotcha. Yeah. So then for something like, with English rugby, you say, okay, if you have like a team, like say, you have a team as a whole, right? And they have, like a mascot and a team name. And on the team, you have the U14 and the U15 and the U16 and the U17 group. But if that team as a whole doesn't really share what its values and identities represent, then like you said, the coaches of the U14 group, well, they have their own values and identity that they use to teach their athletes that are different than the U15 coach, which may be different than the U16 coach, because the club as a whole is not necessarily hiring coaches based on that shared sense of identity. So then that's where you get a little bit more of that diversity there, saying, okay, well, U14 has this attitude and mindset versus U15 has this other mindset that maybe is different. And so it kind of creates a little bit of a dichotomy there because the values of that club as a whole are not so clearly defined or articulated. You have thoughts, reflections? Steffi, I know you were gonna add something.
Yeah, I was gonna say that it's really interesting how they are so attached to this value and the social identity role, because this is like a group, but it's a group of people that it's always cheering for the team or a team that maybe is not their team, but they have to be like really a mindset of doing this for someone else. So it's like, I don't care if this is not my team, but I'm gonna cheer either ways. So like that kind of cheerleader people is like, they have to be like really understand of that role.
Right. I don't remember the specifics, but there was an example of, there was this, I think it was like a college team that was going up against a team of basically prisoners. And the prisoners, they were, formed a football team, I guess, or something like that. And they wanted to play the game against this local college team. But the prisoners, being prisoners, didn't have any members in the audience or anybody there to kind of support them in the way that the college team did. As a result, the college team said, hey, 50% of the audience, can you go to the stands on the other side of the stadium and cheer on this other team? Not because they're prisoners, but just because they're a fellow football team that has no fans. And it's weird when you say, okay, you've got one side that has a stadium full of fans and another side that's empty. Mentally speaking, if you're on the team that has no fans, it's like, okay, well, every time you get a touchdown, everybody boos at you, nobody cheers, and every time you get tackled or whatever, everybody cheers, and nobody things like that. So it's kind of this interesting thing where they say, well, just based on having a shared sense of social support, I guess, that this team has to come along and say, hey, 50% of our fans, will you go and cheer on the opposing team, just because they don't have anybody there that could cheer them on. And so, like you said, it's kind of like that role within that identity that can be kind of weird at times, just because of the circumstance in which it exists, and ultimately the groups that are present, right? Like I wish I remember reading about that, but I wish I remembered the details, because it was like a really interesting story. But I think it was just one of those posts that I saw on social media a bunch of years ago or something. But yeah, quite interesting. Yeah. Awesome. Well, if there's nobody else, then I appreciate you all listening and asking some good questions, and yeah, taking the time to hear me out.
Thank you very much, Doug.
Thank you, Dirk.
Thank you, Dirk.